Welcome to our explainer. If you've had your PayPal account frozen and your money just taken, you know exactly how frustrating that is. Well, today we are breaking down a solid strategy to help you get that money back. And this covers the whole shebang, whether PayPal called it damages caused by an acceptable use policy violation, that's the old term, or the newer one they started using around mid-2022, which is loss recovery.
So yeah, if you're one of the many people who've logged into your account only to see your balance has completely vanished, this guide is absolutely for you. We're going to walk through the exact arguments you can use to challenge it, and these are all based on some really solid legal principles that have worked for others. Okay, so first things first, let's talk about what they're calling this. You might have seen the older term, AUP damages, or maybe the new one, loss recovery. But here's the thing, it's basically the same mechanism, just a new name for the same old process. And you know what the most important part is? It usually comes with the exact same lack of proof on their end. And this is really important to get. The strategy we're about to lay out for you, it isn't some kind of secret loophole. No, it's all based on fundamental contract law. And that means you can use these arguments pretty much anywhere, whether you find yourself in mediation, arbitration, or even a full-blown court case. It applies across the board. All right, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the actual problem, what a balance sweep really is. Then, the core argument, this is the game changer. After that, we'll cover how PayPal sometimes breaches its own rules. Then we'll get into your strategy, the actual roadmap to recovery, and finally, a really crucial reality check. Okay, let's get right into it. Part 1, the problem, the balance sweep. Let's understand what's really going on with your money here. You know, a lot of people hear about this supposed $2,500 fine and think, okay, that's the worst case scenario. But that's not really what happens most of the time. The reality is often what's called a balance sweep. This means they don't just take a set fee, they often take everything, your entire balance wiped down to zero. It doesn't matter if you had $500 in there or $50,000. It's just gone. So how in the world do you fight something like that? Well, this brings us to the core argument. It's all about shifting your legal perspective in a really big way. So what's the secret to challenging this? The key here is to not fall into the trap of defending your business or trying to prove you didn't violate some tiny clause in their user agreement. Instead, the entire strategy, the entire case, is built around this one single idea from contract law. Without proof of actual damages, taking your money is what's called an unenforceable penalty. So what exactly is an unenforceable penalty? Well, think of it like this. It's a charge in a contract that's really there just to punish someone for breaking a rule, rather than to actually cover a real financial loss. And the thing is, courts pretty much never enforce those. Yeah, this slide does a great job of showing the difference. You've got legitimate liquidated damages on one side. That's a reasonable guess at what a future loss might be. But on the other side, you have a penalty, which is just a flat fee meant to punish. That's what makes it unenforceable, and that's often what we're looking at here. And this core argument gets even stronger when you realize that PayPal itself sometimes breaks its own rules. Let's look at how the company can fail to follow its own promises and even consumer law. Right, check this out. This is a big one. You could call it a double breach. They'll limit your account and send an email saying your funds are on hold for 180 days, right? But then what often happens is they just take the money way before that time is up. They promise one thing, do another. That's a breach of their own contract. And in the US, this creates some serious risk for them under laws that prohibit something called UDAAP. That's unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices. So it's unfair because it causes this substantial, unavoidable injury to you, the user. And it's deceptive because, well, it's a classic bait and switch, isn't it? They tell you it's a temporary hold, and then it becomes a permanent confiscation. And you can argue it's abusive, too, because they're taking unreasonable advantage of the power they have. I mean, they have total control, and you have literally no way to protect your money or even check their math on these so-called damages. But look, this isn't just a US issue. There's pretty much a global consensus against these kinds of practices. Take Europe and the UK, for instance. Their rules on unfair commercial practice cover this kind of thing, especially under what's called bait advertising. Or look at Singapore, where the rules are super clear that penalty clauses have to reflect a genuine estimate of actual loss. It's the same story everywhere. All right, let's talk strategy. This is all about making one critical pivot that changes the whole game. It's about shifting the burden of proof. Okay, so here's the #1 strategic rule. You really have to resist the urge to defend your business. The focus has to pivot completely away from what you are doing and onto the financial deduction itself.
And that brings us to the most critical point of all. The burden of proof is on them. It is on PayPal to prove they suffered an actual financial loss because of your account. You don't have to prove your innocence. They have to prove their damages.
So, with that strategy locked in, let's look at the actual roadmap to recovery. This is your step-by-step action plan. It's really a 3-step process. Step 1, gather your evidence. Step 2, send what's called a notice of dispute. And step 3, if needed, file for arbitration with the American Arbitration Association. Okay, gathering evidence. You'll want to collect everything. Transaction logs, all the emails they sent you, especially that one promising a 180-day hold. But honestly, the absolute killer piece of evidence, a screenshot of your account showing you have 0 chargebacks. That single image can completely undermine their claim that they suffered any damages. Now, if your notice of dispute gets ignored, the next step is to file for arbitration. When you do this, there are administrative costs involved for the company, and that alone can often incentivize them to take a much more serious look at your claim. And finally, let's do a crucial reality check. It's really important to manage your expectations before you start this process. Look, the truth is, not everyone gets their money back. These arguments have the highest chance of success for users who have a clean history. We're talking no chargebacks, no fraud, basically in cases where PayPal can't point to any real financial loss. If your account had a ton of chargebacks, it's definitely a tougher fight. So, to wrap this all up, just leave with this one thought. The question isn't whether you violated a policy. The real question, the one you need to force them to answer, is this: can PayPal actually prove its financial damages? Because if they can't, well, you know what that means.